Hello and welcome to the theElpyDimension. I am your guide, Elpy. Today is the 6th of January, 2025, and this is mixed worm bin number 1. Sorry, and it has been 15 days since the time for pie feeding. I've noticed, again, that it appears the most common worms on the bubble mailers are blue worms. And it was over a month ago that someone suggested in my new blue worm bin that I try putting bubble wrap. And I have put bubble wrap in the blue worm bin and the mixed worm bins. And look at, but underneath the bubble wrap, these are not blue worms. You can see by the yellow. It's possible, based on this worm's size, it does not have a clitellum, so it is not a sexually mature individual. It is not an adult, but that could be a European nightcrawler. Okay, this is the feeding zone. It's about 62 degrees Fahrenheit, or what's that, like 17 degrees Celsius? Somewhere around there. Okay. Mixed worm bin number 1, 6th of January, 2025. It's late in the night in Texas. Anyways, this is day 15. The last time we checked in on this bin was 4 days ago. Wait. Yes. It was the day 11 since the time for pie feeding. And now I'm doing a day 15. So as kind of has been the standard, what I've been doing in these check-ins. And I was thinking that I would cut this series off and say, you know what, on day 16 or 15 or 18 or whatever, I'm done with this series, as I'm calling it, the Time for Pie series. But then as I got to thinking about it, I thought, no, they should end when this feeding is gone. We should follow this feeding from beginning to end. So that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, but we've also been checking in on the previous feeding zone because, well, this is the previous feeding zone from December 7th. And there's still a lot going on here. I believe because the residue, okay, so here it's possible for European nightcrawlers to be smaller, I've learned. Typically, people differentiate them from the red wigglers by their size. But given the specifics of their situation, of their environment, it is possible for European nightcrawlers to be smaller. With that said, however, I would wager that this is a red wiggler because it is a rather small individual. However, this white sort of bulging band tells us that this is a sexually mature individual, an adult. So with it being, I think it's fair to say this is a red wiggler. And I think that you could really nerd out, which I say with all due love and respect, and measure, see each of those stripes? Those are segments. You could count those segments. And that's also a way that people identify different species of worms, is by counting where certain characteristics on their bodies are, at what segment. And how we know this is a European nightcrawler or a red wiggler also is because of the yellow tip on its tail. Okay. Well, I know I did an identification video before, but that individual seemed to be really a good one. Oh, I want to point out something else. I don't have an example of an Asian jumping worm right now, or a just jumping worm, or a crazy worm, or a snake worm. But supposedly, do you see how it's clitellum, right? It's like this belt. But then when we flip it over, or when we try to flip it over, this guy's like, dude. See how it appears as though it's not consistent in the way that it wraps around its body. See what I'm saying? Right? That's the underside. That's the top side. They say that the jumping worms, that their clitellum wraps around is complete. So keep that in mind. Okay. So the last feeding zone has remained well occupied in this bin, and this is a very large population. And see, they can be different colors. So you can't always say, oh, a dark worm is a blue worm. But again, look, we see a sort of bulging clitellum and the yellow tip of the tail. Did we just see some cocoons? And now no, I think those are, okay, super nerding out. I'm in nerd mode. So this is a really large population, and if you don't already know or you haven't already picked up, I think this is like a 16 quart. This is a pretty, I'm gonna say pretty standard size storage tub in the US. And it's 3/4 of the way full, if not a little bit more than that. So there's a lot of volume here for these worms to navigate, which means especially I can say this now following this feeding, see that clitellum? That I can have a feeding over here that's almost gone and a new feeding over here, and I have enough worms for them to go to work. But anyways, I'm not an expert. Some of what I do is just putting together the pieces that I learn from other people as well as my experiences, and as so much of science, those things can change along the way. I've yet to see a blue worm, which is not a surprise in the winter. Well, and the irony there, this is a blue worm. How do I know? One, I've noticed they aren't quite as colorful in terms of like the yellow. They will have it, but they often are much more pale. When you don't see that really beautiful blue, they are a sort of really pale color. And they have a yellowishness to their tail, right? And sometimes they are yellow, but there's not a distinct yellow tip. And look how this guy is like, I am out of here. And then that does not look like a fully formed clitellum, and yet it is a clitellum. But you see how it's just more flush with the body. It doesn't stick out. And like I heard others say, and I said in my other video, they really stretch out when they're trying to move. So this is a blue worm, and maybe the fact that its clitellum is not super duper evident, but I mean it is. But is it? Maybe this individual is not super duper mature. But that said, that's still a pretty good sized worm. Thank you. Appreciate ya. Okay. All right, let's move a little bit quicker since we decided to go into a lesson. But we still are seeing mostly European night crawlers and or red wigglers, as opposed to blue worms. But I've also learned from trying to collect them for my new bin back in September, it's very squishy wet down here, that they are sneaky. And I've heard other people say the same thing. Okay, now that is a funky smell. And I think I had kind of noticed a funky smell 4 days ago, and I was kind of like, meh. But given how wet it is, how wet it continues to be, there's still a lot of worms over here, but I really don't like the funky smell. Again, this is a strong population, but so what am I going to do? I think here's what I'm going to do. Get that worm off my wrist before I drop him somewhere. Okay. Well, I'm a rebel. Because sometimes I'm just too lazy to put in more effort. That's really just a grocery bag. And I don't have any, this is rotting garlic, prepared, as in cut up paper. I have lots of paper, but this being just a check-in, I should know better by this point, right? That you should just still have paper ready when you're me, because you know that chances are you might need to remedy a bin. And so but here's the cool part. Me putting that paper down there like that, also means that there's air pockets in there, and that will help cut down the anaerobic bacteria. So I'm just going to do something because of that smell, and because for these check-ins, it's now been 2 weeks, so it's not unusual for the whole bin to not have been stirred in 2 weeks. I'm just going to do a little bit of a fluff in a spot that we haven't been visiting. So other than checking in, I'm not going to check this whole corner. What in the heck? Oh, this is a seriously rotting. That's freaked me out. This is an avocado pit, but it's like liquefying. It's pretty gross and interesting at the same time. Because it looked like pus. It smells like yummy garlic. So the next question that I have for myself in this situation, obviously there's a big mass of paper down there that's very wet with rotting garlic. But yeah, the next question, take that piece of wood, and there's some worms over here, is what is the next step? When do we want to feed this bin again? When should we plan that out? And my thinking is to let this bin start putting in work. Let's go over here just to fluff it up, because we haven't in a minute. Haven't been in this corner. So here's a bunch of plant debris, sort of woody stuff that's longer term foods. You see that this material is really, it's a lot more broken down than not. So instead of me continuing to add tons of new material, it probably would be a good idea for me to start. This is a supposedly commercially, I know this is not a commercial setting, biodegradable glove. Actually, it's 2 gloves in one. But it'd probably be a good idea for me to just, I'll still feed the worms, but slow my roll on adding more paper and stuff. Like maybe the, the thing to do is to start picking out the bigger pieces and kind of slowly but surely put them all in the same area and start, sort of intentionally creating a migrationary spot. Migrationary, I don't think that's a word. Migratory, perhaps. I'm not sure it fits the setting. Yeah, so I think that's what I need to be doing with this bin is, taking these chunks and picking a spot and saying that's where we're going to start moving, congregating, if you will, the older stuff. But I'll continue to think through just how I want to do that. All right, well, let's get to the meat and potatoes, so to speak. And that is the time for pie feeding zone. Kind of big and a lot wider than I have been. Okay. Lots of worms. Piece of wood. It is a little bit warmer. See that guy hustling? That's a blue worm. Yeah, as is expected, it's warmer down here. This is probably, oh yeah, look at that. Nice congregation of worms. Oh, yeah, our pie is still here. And the worms are kind of all over it. This is our pumpkin pie. So it's taken 2 weeks. And granted, the worms had food over there still to eat. But yeah, it's taken 2 weeks for this area to really become the highlight of their feeding. And this was a very large feeding for them. Well, I'm kind of always giving them a very large feeding, but it's still been a large feeding. This is probably the most excavation I've done of the feeding zone since we began. This is a big old clump of peppers. This Smell of rotting peppers. Got some pita bread. Tons and tons of worms. We're just scooping them out. Something moist is on my arm. Nice. So, interestingly enough, got some persimmon, pepper, there are definitely thousands of worms in this bin. There's another persimmon and some pita bread. So, there's a lot for these worms to eat when you include the paper products that are all very well saturated in rotting vegetative juices. That's a big blue worm. However, the actual food items, besides the pie, which where is our pie? There's our pie. The actual food items, except for some pepper remnants, pita and pie, and pumpkin stem. That's from a totally different feeding, but you got it. Are gone. So, I look at that and I say, I know from over here that there's lots of juices, and just from common sense, there's lots of juices in that paper, and there's still food there for them. However, it is interesting to note that 2 weeks later, the worms have just made their way in the last week, but they've really populated the pumpkin pie 2 weeks, 15 days later. However, or with that being said, I see that and I'm like, oh wow, dang. Their food, as I see it, is mostly gone. So my question was, gosh, when should I really feed this bin? And my answer is sooner than I thought. However, I do still want to do what I said and start focusing on letting them breaking down the material. But so putting those two thoughts together, normally I would say, you know what, that food is mostly gone. And I would probably even in this visit, I'm not going to, but right in another circumstance, say I'm going to feed, and I'm going to feed over there in that corner or in this corner, or maybe even the center of the bin. But since I do want them to break down material more, I'm going to say, let's give it another week and let them just break down what's here. Mainly because I'm looking at this and I'm seeing a whole lot of what is the word? Undigested? Intact? I'm gonna find the word. I should. A whole lot of intact. We're gonna go with intact for right now. A whole lot of intact material. And, you know, on the one hand, you say this thing's nowhere near harvesting. Yes, I know. But it has me thinking about, like I said, at least almost like I've seen Plant Obsessed to do with the wedge system, to start moving, especially the longer term items. This is a cork that's nowhere near breaking down. You know, these pieces of wood, these clumps of paper, and sort of moving them into one half. So that's where my focus is going to be, is maybe make a point to say, this is a tea bag that someone pointed out to me. They mentioned, you know, it's probably not a good idea to have paper or plastic in your bins. And I said, yeah, you're right. That's from a tea bag, but I never really fully examined. Is this actually, this tea liner, is this tea liner plastic? Might well be, huh? Let's go ahead and take it out. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do, you know, kind of slowly but surely, just kind of move and start using the material that's already here to go along with the feedings. Okay, so there's my thoughts on mixed worm bin number 1. The food is mostly gone. The pie is not. The pie is still, oops, very evident, but the worms are on it. So in a week, I'll feed. So as long as that pie is still here, we'll continue with this bin in the series. And then whoever eats their pie first is no longer part of the series. Okay, thank you so much for your time. Be safe, be well. Bye for now.